Hey there friends, it's Mandy. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are talking all about yoga blocks. So grab a couple blocks, hop on your yoga mat, and let's get into it. Alright, so as I mentioned today, we are talking all about yoga blocks. So I know for these next couple of videos, just going to be kind of sharing some different information, some different ways that you can use some common yoga props that you might see in a yoga studio that might be very beneficial for you to use at home. Now, I know sometimes, especially when you're new to the practice, there can be a little bit of this feeling of like, oh, but I don't want to use props because then I'll look like I don't know what I'm doing or like I'm not capable. And I would like to take a moment and just dispel all of those thoughts out of your mind, because yoga blocks and props in general are absolutely wonderful. They do amazing things for your practice, and actually when you use them appropriately, they can actually help you get more of a benefit out of the posture, especially because they can help you keep your alignment correctly, which your body will receive so much more benefit if you're keeping your alignment correct in the pose, rather than just trying to contort your body into weird ways and shapes to kind of get into how the pose should look. So all of us in our yoga practice, all of our bodies have different experiences, different stories. Our anatomy is all very unique. So I want you to just start to learn to embrace props and how wonderful they can be for us in our practice. I have been practicing yoga for several years. I teach yoga and I still love using props for myself. So huge advocate of props. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, as I mentioned today, we are talking all about yoga blocks. So yoga blocks, they come in all different materials. These are just some cheapy ones that I got at Target several years ago when I first started practicing. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on my mat, on my props, or anything like that. So I just went to Target, got the cheapest yoga mat I could find. Same with the blocks, just got the cheapest ones that I could find. And these are made out of foam. And honestly, they've been good to me. They're looking a little bit rough. You can see some little chunks missing on days when my fingernails get a little bit long, but they still get the job done. They're still totally useful. So I personally I feel no need and no desire to get any more expensive ones. With that said, they do make some that are more eco-friendly. They make some that are made out of cork, which of course is a very renewable resource. So you might check that out. I have tried cork blocks before. For me personally, they're a little bit hard and a little bit heavy, so I'm not the biggest fan of using them in my practice. Another kind of block you can get, I've also seen them make blocks that are made out of recycled foam, so that's much more eco-friendly as well. Those are a little bit lighter weight, typically a little bit softer than the cork blocks. Of course, it also all depends on the brand that you get as well. So if you want to get some blocks, depending on what is important for you and your practice, I highly recommend doing some research and just kind of figuring out which blocks work best for you and your practice and your budget as well. As I mentioned, I got some very cheap ones at Target because I was trying to be very frugal, because I didn't know if yoga was going to be something that I was going to continue doing. Obviously it is, but at the time I wasn't ready to make a big investment. So you might be there, you might have been practicing for a while, or maybe you haven't and you just know, you know what, this is for me. I've drank the Kool-Aid, yoga is the most amazing thing ever. Then you might want to spend a little bit extra money. But That's totally up to you. Also, if you don't have blocks, maybe, I know it's difficult to get to the store right now for a lot of people because of coronavirus, and also maybe you just don't have any extra income to spend on props, and that is totally okay. You can absolutely use like a large, heavy book, like an encyclopedia or like a Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire type thing. You can also, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but depending on how you're using your blocks, so one of the things that we use our blocks for is to kind of bring the floor up to us when we can't quite reach the mat in certain standing poses. So you can actually place your hand on a water bottle. You can place your hand on like the edge of a table or a couch or kind of really whatever you have nearby. So don't feel like you have to have these in order to still get the benefit of using props. So absolutely feel free to get creative and just kind of use whatever you have lying around to get the job done. So by any means, you do not need to buy blocks. But if you have them and you'd like to know how you can use these a little bit more in your practice, then stick around and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the first way that I really like to use props, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is to bring the floor up to you, right? So, for example, in our standing forward fold, if we have really tight hamstrings, or maybe we're just not super warmed up in our practice, then a great thing to do would be to bring some blocks underneath the hands. Now, blocks do have 3 different height settings. So you have your high setting or level 3, you have your medium setting, which is your level 2, then you have your low setting or your level 1. So keep in mind as I'm showing you these different things that you can do with props or with these blocks specifically, they don't have to necessarily be right at the level that you see me using them in. So absolutely feel it out. If you need a little bit higher, feel free to take it to level 3. You can even stack a block on top of itself like this. If you're doing it like this though, make sure your bottom block is on level 1. That way it's nice and stable. You don't want to be falling out of it. And this is a really great way to bring some even extra height to bring the floor up to you a little bit better. So that's another thing that you can do. So I really love to take a block underneath each hand in our standing forward fold, and that can just be really nice to feel a little bit more supported on the lower back, especially as I mentioned, if you're super tight in your hamstrings in your back body. And as I mentioned, if you don't have blocks, you can just feel free to get creative. Maybe you place your hand on some water bottles. Maybe you place your hand on some stacked books, maybe on the edge of a table. All of those are wonderful options as well. Another posture that I see, which is very common, that people need a little bit extra lift, is our lunges, our runner's lunge and our low lunge specifically. So as we come into our runner's lunge, same exact thing in our forward fold. You might just take some blocks underneath your hands on each side of your leg. Again, they have that high, medium, and low setting. So you can play around with it, see how much lift that you need to feel good, to make your body feel good in the posture. And then kind of building off of our lunge there, right? Another one that I really love to use is our lunge twist or simple twist. So instead of having both hands down on the block, right, you would have one hand down on the block as you're twisting through your upper body, reaching up to your fingertips. Maybe you have your hand on your hip, and that's a really wonderful way to keep the length through your spine there, because in our lunges, if you feel like you have some tightness in your hips, it's better to bring the floor up to you. That way you can maintain the length through your spine than it is to kind of round and try and like really struggle to reach for the floor. Right? Because as I mentioned, it is all about alignment, and it is way better to use some props to make sure that you keep your body, especially your spine, in proper alignment. That way you can really, truly receive all of the major benefits of the posture. So kind of moving on out of those poses, also going to show you some cutaways here in a moment of several different standing postures that you can use this in. So The concept is exactly the same. In every single one of these poses, we are bringing the floor up to us. So I believe I show you in our pyramid pose. Pyramid pose is a super deep stretch, especially for that hamstring in that front leg. So as we're kind of getting in there, it's much better to really focus on lengthening through the spine and placing our hands on some blocks than kind of dumping and rounding into that lower back, trying to force ourselves deeper into the posture than our body is ready to go. Another pose kind of building off of that pyramid pose is our revolved triangle. So same thing, just as in our low lunge, moving that into a twist, taking our pyramid pose and adding a twist onto that for our revolved triangle pose. So instead of having a hand, each hand on a block, you would just have one hand on a block and then twist through the upper body, maybe reaching the fingertips up, maybe placing the hand on the hip. And that's a beautiful way to elevate up. So now in those poses, in our pyramid pose, in our revolved triangle, you don't have to have a block, right? You can stack some books. You can even place your hands on your shin or your thigh in the pyramid pose and kind of use your body as its own prop. That's super helpful. Same thing in the revolved triangle. Maybe you have your hand on your shin, or maybe you place your hand on a bench, on a chair, on a table, whatever you have nearby that you can use to kind of bring that floor up to you a little bit. So feel free, please, please, please get creative. I don't ever want anyone to feel like they have to spend a lot of money to practice yoga. So trying to think of all different things that you might have lying around the house that you can use in lieu of blocks if you don't have them. Now, another couple of postures, standing poses, are our revolved half moon and our half moon pose. So these two are very, very, very common poses where it can be really difficult to get the hand all the way down to the floor for whatever reason. Especially, there's so much going on in those postures, trying to maintain our balance while reaching down for the floor. It can be quite a lot. So I always recommend people use blocks in both of those poses until they get very comfortable with them using the blocks, and then they can start experimenting without. And as always, you can change around the height settings. Remember, we have that high, medium, and low setting for our blocks. So these are just a few standing postures. There may have been some other ones in there that I just forgot to mention, so you might see more in the cutaway than I actually talked about. But these are just a few standing postures and a few postures where you might want to bring the floor up to you. I tried to think of the most common ones that I recommend students using blocks for if they need them. Now, another way that you can use your blocks is to support your body. So for example, in our bound angle pose, a lot of students have, and just a lot of people in general, have really, really tight hips. And as they try and get into that pose, they might feel a lot of gripping in their groin and their inner thigh, kind of pulling their knees up really high. Now, if you feel that way in the posture and you try and kind of force yourself into it without creating any extra support, then what that does is it actually kind of takes your body into a stress response. And if your body doesn't feel safe, then you're not going to receive the same stretch as you would if your body was safe and supported. So you can use some blocks to bring those underneath your knees. And if you don't have blocks, again, you can use some pillows, blankets, again, some Harry Potter books, anything you got lying around to kind of just bring some support underneath the knees. That way, the knees have something to rest down into, and then when you do that, then you're actually able to relax into your hips, into your groin, and then your body is actually able to feel safe to relax and receive the stretch. So really, really amazing way to use some props there in your bound angle pose. Another way that you can support your body. Say you're trying to sit upright in your easy pose or your Sukhasana. You can do the same thing actually as you do with your bound angle. If you're feeling that tightness in the hips, just slide some blocks underneath the knees. Another thing you can do, and which I show in the cutaway, is you can actually come sitting up on a block. So I know a lot of times in yoga classes we talk about sitting up on the edge of a blanket. However, if you don't have a blanket, or maybe you need some extra height, a block is an excellent prop to use to bring some height underneath the seat. And what that does is it actually creates more length through your lower back body. And think of your pelvis like kind of like a bowl of Cheerios, right? So if you're really tight in your hips and you're kind of, then that bowl of Cheerios kind of starts to dump backwards into your lower back, and then that creates kind of a rounding and creates a lot of pressure on our lower spine, which we do not want. So by bringing some height underneath the seat, your pelvic bowl actually starts to tilt forward, kind of like you're trying to dump your bowl of Cheerios out in front of you. I know that's kind of a weird analogy, but that's what my yoga teacher in my teacher training used, and it kind of connected the dots for me really well. So I hope that that imagery kind of helps for you also. But so you really want to think about bringing height under the seat, which helps bring that pelvic bowl forward, which then relieves a lot of pressure off of our lower back and our lower spine. So, and then it doesn't have to just be in our Sukhasana. You can also do it in your seated forward fold, which I show in the cutaway. I don't show this in the cutaway, but you can also do it in your wide leg seated forward fold. Pretty much most seated postures where you're doing some kind of fold or you need some extra support, having a block underneath the seat or just any prop can be super, super helpful there. Now, another way that you can use a block to support the body is in our supported bridge pose and our supported shoulder stands. So as you come lying down onto your back, now maybe you're at the end of a Vinyasa practice or a Hatha practice and the teacher is guiding you into a bridge pose. Maybe you're just tired and you're done putting effort in, or maybe you just want to take this pose in a little bit more of a restorative manner and you just want to kind of relax into it and hold it a little bit longer. Then what you're going to do, you're just going to come lying down on your back, setting up your bridge exactly as you would for any other time. So walking your heels in towards your bum, making sure your feet are hips distance apart. You're then going to press into your feet, lift your hips up just enough to slide that block directly underneath the sacrum. So you don't want it underneath the low back and you don't want it like right underneath the bum. You want it at that triangle bony point at the base of the spine in between the bum and the lower back. So make sure you're mindful of where you place that block there. And then from there, you'll just relax your hips down onto it. You can place your arms however feels good. And that can be an excellent restorative bridge pose variation. And as I mentioned earlier with our supported shoulder stand, the base setup is exactly the same as in our bridge pose. But then you would be able to slowly, one at a time, begin to send the legs up towards the ceiling. So instead of having your hips over your shoulders, you just have your hips slightly elevated, supported on the block. And that way you can kind of just relax into your legs a little bit more, and you're still getting the benefits of an inversion, but in a much more restorative manner. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of ways that you can use blocks. I tried to show you some of the most common poses that I use them in, that I kind of guide my students to use them in. So with whatever you're using, whatever props that you're using, whether it's blocks, whether you're just kind of grabbing anything around the house, I highly encourage you to get creative. Really, any way that you use your prop, as long as it helps you feel supported in your practice and as long as it is helping improve your alignment in a posture, then you're using it correctly. One last thing. I don't have a cutaway for this, but another way you can use a pose use a block is either in your chair pose or your bridge pose. You can actually take your block, narrow like this, and place it right in between your knees. And then that'll give you the action of really hugging those inner thighs in together, which is what we want in those poses, right? Without having the knees knocking in towards one another there. So really using the prop in that manner, it really helps you find that activation and that fire right in the inner part of the leg, which we would want in our bridge pose and our chair pose. So if you have any questions about that, I know I just kind of like threw that one in there at the last minute, just kind of that light bulb, like, ooh, I have one more. So if you have any questions about that or any of the anything that we've talked about today, please drop a comment down below. You can also reach out to me via Facebook, Instagram, or you can shoot me an email. All of my information is in the description box down below. If you like these videos, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. I do greatly appreciate it. I make new videos every Monday and a Wednesday, so stay tuned. In this upcoming Wednesday, we'll be wrapping up our chakra meditation series with the crown chakra. So until next time, as always, you guys, the love, the light, and the darkness within me sees, honors, and recognizes the love, the light, and the darkness within you. Namaste.